Sunshine, 2007. Opening our list is Danny Boyle's Sunshine. This unique film begins as a high sci-fi tale about saving humanity but gradually mutates into pure existential horror. The plot unfolds in the near future. The sun is dying and the crew of the Icarus II ship is carrying a gigantic nuclear charge to restart it. However, along the way, they pick up a distress signal from the first Icarus, which disappeared 7 years ago, and this decision proves fatal. The first half of the film overwhelms the viewer with physics and psychology. The realization that you're flying straight into the heart of a blazing inferno is awe-inspiring enough. But the real horror begins when the crew confronts the consequences of being alone with the sun for so long. Space is presented here as a divine, blinding force that drives people mad. The light that should bring life becomes a source of madness and religious ecstasy. When an uninvited guest comes aboard, the film turns into a visceral, golden-lit slasher, where the enemy is a man who has gazed too long upon the face of God. Boyle masterfully uses visuals and soundtrack to create a sense of mounting paranoia. Sunshine is frightening not because of the darkness, but because of the excess of light. This film explores the fragility of the human mind in the vastness of the universe. In the confined space of the ship, surrounded by millions of degrees of heat, the line between science and madness blurs. It is one of the most beautiful and simultaneously disturbing space films, where the final act leaves behind not a feeling of victory, but a cold realization of the price of species survival. Pandorum, 2009. The second block on our list is Pandorum, a film that perfectly embodies the fear of deep space and the loss of reality. Two crew members awaken on the gigantic ark Elysium after hypersleep. They have no memory of who they are, what their mission is, or how much time has passed. The ship is without power, strange sounds are everywhere, and the life support systems are on the verge of failure. But the worst horror awaits them in the dark corridors. Creatures that were clearly not on the passenger list prowl the ship. The film's title refers to a fictional mental disorder called orbital dysfunction, or Pandorum. This condition develops in astronauts due to prolonged isolation and the fear of irreversibility, leading to hallucinations and outbursts of uncontrollable aggression. The entire plot is a journey through levels of madness. We join the characters as they try to understand what happened to the thousands of colonists, and whether the monsters in the shadows are merely a figment of their overactive imaginations. Pandorum captivates with its atmosphere of rusty, dying iron amidst an endless void. It's a grimy, claustrophobic horror film that depicts the degradation of humanity in the most graphic way possible. The film constantly poses questions. What lengths are people willing to go to in order to survive? And what happens to morality when you realize that planet Earth no longer exists and you're trapped in a metal box with monsters? The film's ending turns the entire narrative on its head, making Pandorum one of the most underrated and terrifying examples of the genre, where the fear of the void becomes almost tangible. Europa Report 2013. Third place goes to Report from Europa, or Europa. It's one of the coldest and most scientifically accurate space horror films of the last decade. Shot in found footage format, the film tells the story of a private expedition to Jupiter's moon Europa, where scientists hope to discover life beneath the ice. There's no bombastic dialogue or fantastical lasers, only a gritty realism that makes the on-screen action frighteningly believable. The horror in this film builds slowly, like a crack in the ice. We follow the crew through the ship's fixed cameras, creating a sense of presence and at the same time utter helplessness. When the expedition loses contact with Earth, space ceases to be an object of exploration and becomes a hostile environment. Fear here stems from the silence and the realization that any technical error millions of kilometers from home is a death sentence. When the heroes finally encounter what lies beneath Europa's ice, the film doesn't devolve into a typical action flick. It remains the tragedy of scientists confronted with something so alien and majestic that human life has no meaning for it. Report from Europa is terrifying in its sterility and the indifference of the universe. This film suggests that contact with extraterrestrial life may not be a triumph, but a quiet, icy end to human ambition. Life, 2017. In fourth place is Life. If you thought Alien was scary, this film will show you what a biological nightmare looks like without the gothic backdrop, set in the modern ISS. A group of researchers receives a soil sample from Mars, in which they discover a single-celled creature. The joy of this greatest discovery in history quickly gives way to paralyzing fear. The creature, named Calvin, begins to grow at an incredible rate, adapting to any conditions and displaying a frightening intelligence. Life's greatest asset is the creature itself. Calvin doesn't resemble either man or beast. He's all muscle, nerve, and brain. Every scene you interact with him is filled with tension, because you don't know what this life form is capable of. Space here is the perfect trap. The station's isolation, the lack of weapons, and the need to observe quarantine turn the ISS into a labyrinth where a predator is always one step ahead. The film is devoid of Hollywood optimism. It shows that evolution isn't about good and evil, but about survival. Calvin isn't evil, he simply wants to live, and for him, humans are merely a source of protein and an obstacle. The film's ending is one of the most powerful and pessimistic in the genre, leaving a lingering aftertaste of hopelessness. Life reminds us, before we search for life among the stars, we should consider whether we are prepared for what that life will find within us. The Last Days on Mars, 2013. Fifth place goes to The Last Days on Mars. Imagine, the first manned expedition to the Red Planet is drawing to a close. Only 19 hours remain until the rescue ship arrives. But just hours before launch, one of the scientists discovers traces of microscopic life in the soil samples. Seeking glory, he returns to the excavation site, falls into a crevice, and becomes the first carrier of an alien pathogen. This isn't just science fiction, it's a gritty space zombie horror. A Martian bacteria turns people into aggressive, mindless creatures, whose sole purpose is to spread infection. The film is terrifying in its down-to-earth nature, and the sense of everyday life turned into a nightmare. There's no high-tech futurism here. All the equipment looks worn, dusty, and fragile. When an outbreak of infection begins on the station, the claustrophobia of the Martian base becomes almost palpable. The horror in The Last Days on Mars is built on paranoia and hopelessness. You're trapped on a planet with a toxic atmosphere, and the only escape is a ship that's off-limits to infected people. The director masterfully uses the orange landscapes of Mars and the cramped quarters to create an atmosphere of complete isolation. This film is about how scientific curiosity uncovers an ancient biological abscess, and how space is unforgiving of mistakes, even 19 hours before rescue. Apollo 18, 2011. In sixth place is Apollo 18, a found footage project that offers an alternative and very disturbing account of why humans no longer go to the moon. Officially, the Apollo 18 mission was canceled, but the film claims that in 1974, 2 American astronauts did land on the lunar surface as part of a secret Defense Department mission. What they discovered there was neither a Nazi base nor alien saucers in the conventional sense. It was something far more organic and eerie. The pseudo-documentary format works perfectly here. Grainy images, signal interference, and a peculiar sound create a complete illusion of reality. The moon in this film is not just a dead rock, but a place where the geology itself can be hostile. The heroes discover traces of the Soviet expedition and realize they are not alone. The horror builds through small details: displaced rocks, strange radio noises, and inexplicable damage to spacesuits. Apollo 18 plays on the fear of an alien consciousness mimicking the environment. By the time the astronauts realize the true nature of the lunar rocks, it's too late. The film perfectly conveys the feeling of loneliness millions of miles from home, where death can lurk behind every crater, and the government is willing to sacrifice you to prevent contamination from reaching Earth. This is one of the most atmospheric films about the moon, and will make you look at the moon with great caution. Eniara, 2018. Seventh place goes to the Swedish film Eniara, and it's perhaps the most depressing and existentially terrifying film on our list. The story unfolds on a giant space ferry, ferrying colonists from a dying Earth to Mars. The journey is supposed to take just 3 weeks, and the ship resembles a luxury shopping mall. However, a collision with space debris throws the vessel off course and renders it unable to maneuver. The Eniara simply continues to fly forward into the endless void, with no chance of return or docking. This film isn't about monsters, but rather about the slow fading of human hope. We follow the passengers over decades. The horror here lies in the realization of the scale of time and space. The ship becomes a microcosm of a society going through all stages of degradation, from attempts to maintain civilization to the emergence of insane cults and mass apathy. The central element is Mima, an artificial intelligence that transmits soothing images of Earth to people, but even the machine eventually breaks down from the grief it absorbs from people. Eniara is terrifying with its silence and scientific inevitability. It's a horror film about the finiteness of resources and the infinity of the vacuum. Watching everything human, art, religion, love, disappear into dust against the backdrop of indifferent stars is physically difficult. This film teaches that space isn't an adventure, but a gigantic graveyard, where we are mere random sparks fading into darkness. After the credits roll, all that remains is a deafening feeling of emptiness that lingers for a long time. Solaris, 1972. In 8th place is Andrei Tarkovsky's timeless classic, Solaris. If you're looking for depth in a space horror film, this is the perfect candidate. Psychologist Chris Kelvin arrives at a space station orbiting the ocean planet Solaris to decide whether to shut down the project. The station is in chaos. One of the scientists has committed suicide, and two others are on the brink of insanity. Chris soon realizes the reason. The Solaris ocean is sentient and materializes people's most painful, shameful, and deeply hidden memories. The horror in Solaris is purely psychological. The planet doesn't attack physically, it tortures people with their own past. Chris is visited by his wife, Hari, who committed suicide many years ago. She looks alive, feels alive, but she is only a projection created by the ocean. The horror here lies in the inability to distinguish reality from phantom, and the realization that your own memory can become your executioner. Tarkovsky creates a lingering, melancholic, and terrifying atmosphere of an abandoned station, where the footsteps of ghosts echo in the sterile corridors. Space here is a mirror. We search the universe for other worlds and civilizations. But as one of the characters says, we don't need other worlds, we need a mirror. Solaris terrifies us with the thought that contact with a higher intelligence may not be a dialogue but a merciless dissection of the human conscience. This is philosophical horror of the highest order, where the main monster is our own sense of guilt, given flesh. High Life 2018. 9th place goes to Claire Denis' High Life. It's a radical, physical, and deeply disturbing look at space exploration. The story unfolds aboard a ship crewed by criminals sentenced to life imprisonment or the death penalty. Instead of prison, they're offered a mission to explore a black hole. But in reality, they're mere guinea pigs in the hands of the mad Dr. Dibbs, obsessed with creating the perfect child in radiation-filled, zero-gravity conditions. Space in this film isn't a romantic faraway place, but a rusty, leaky prison hurtling toward nowhere. Horror here is born of corporeality and isolation. We see people, deprived of a future and hope, slowly turning into animals or falling into apathy. Scenes of sexual violence, cruel experiments, and oppressive silence create an atmosphere of absolute existential impasse. There are no external monsters here. All evil is concentrated within human nature, pushed to its limits. High Life is terrifying in its coldness. The black hole toward which the ship is hurtling serves as a metaphor for absolute nothingness, which sucks away the remnants of humanity. Robert Pattinson plays a man trying to preserve some shred of dignity amidst total decay. This film explores how, even at the edge of the universe, humans cannot escape their instincts, and space only reveals our inner emptiness. The film leaves a heavy aftertaste, and makes one wonder, is there any point in the survival of a species willing to commit such atrocities for the sake of science? Dark City, 1998. Alex Proyas's cult classic, Dark City, ranks 10th. Although the film takes place in a metropolis, seemingly on Earth, it's one of the most original space horror films ever made. The protagonist, John Murdoch, awakens in a hotel to find the city plunged into perpetual night, its inhabitants unable to remember their past. Every midnight, the city literally rebuilds itself. Buildings rise from the ground, and mysterious creatures in black, known as Wanderers, alter people's memories. The horror of Dark City is the dread of losing one's identity and realizing that one's entire life has been a laboratory experiment. It gradually becomes clear that the city is a gigantic space station drifting in the void, and the Wanderers are a dying alien race attempting to understand the human soul by using us as lab rats. The cosmic evil here doesn't attack physically, it steals the very essence of what makes us human. The film's visual style, inspired by film noir and German expressionism, creates an oppressive, claustrophobic atmosphere. This is a film about how reality can be just a set, and the sky above a fake. Horror is born from powerlessness in the face of a force that can stop time and rewrite yourself. Dark City was a precursor to The Matrix, but it is much darker and closer to the horror genre. It is a reminder that in the infinite cosmos, we may not only be alone, but completely controlled by forces for whom our feelings are merely data in a scientific report. Color Out of Space, 2019, 11th place, goes to The Color Out of Space, a film adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's classic short story. Space horror is presented here in its purest, most incomprehensible form. A meteorite crashes onto the Gardner family farm, bringing with it not a little green man or a virus, but the color, an alien entity that defies description and does not fit into the earthly spectrum. This creature begins to slowly but inexorably transform all life around it. The horror here lies in the total biological deformation. Plants begin to glow with a strange neon light, animals fuse into horrific lumps of flesh, and people's minds begin to rot. Space in this film is the source of the other, something that does not want to capture or kill us in the usual sense. It simply restructures our world according to its own alien laws. Nicolas Cage, in the title role, masterfully depicts the disintegration of a personality confronted with something impossible to comprehend. Director Richard Stanley uses visual effects to convey the atmosphere of cosmic contamination. The most terrifying thing about color is its impersonality. We cannot negotiate with this evil or defeat it with weapons. It is radiation from the abyss that transforms your home into a surreal hell. The film leaves behind a feeling of profound anxiety and an awareness of how fragile our world is in the face of a spark of another being, accidentally swooping in from the void. It is the finest example of Lovecraftian cosmism in modern cinema. The Void 2016. At number 12 is The Void. It's a true treat for fans of old-school horror and body horror in the vein of John Carpenter. The plot begins in a provincial hospital, surrounded by a group of people in white robes with black triangles on their faces. But the main threat lies within. In the clinic's basement, a rift opens into another dimension, the very same void from which unimaginable creatures begin to infiltrate our world. Here, medicine meets the black hole of the occult. The cosmic horror in The Void isn't just aliens from other planets, it's creatures from the spaces between worlds. We witness grotesque body transformations. People turn into mountains of tentacles, teeth, and slime. The entire film is permeated with the feeling that our reality is merely a thin skin on the body of something enormous and pulsating, and that this skin has just burst. The film is notable for its use of practical effects instead of CGI, which makes the horror tangible and sticky. Space here is an abyss that doesn't just stare at you, but begins to grow through you. This dark, bloody, and incredibly atmospheric film explores the dimensions beyond our understanding, where humanity is merely a building block for eternal suffering. The Void proves that space horror can be intimate, yet have the scale of a cosmic catastrophe. Under the Skin, 2013. 13th place goes to Under the Skin, one of the most unusual and visually stunning space horror films. The plot centers on an alien being in the guise of an attractive woman who travels through rainy Scotland, seducing lonely men. But this isn't a typical alien abduction story. Those caught in its clutches find themselves in a strange, black space where their bodies literally dissolve, leaving only empty shells. The horror here is utterly cold and detached. Scarlett Johansson's portrayal of the alien consciousness is depicted as utterly devoid of human empathy. Space isn't the setting, but the source of that icy gaze. The most frightening scenes aren't the violence, but rather the indifference with which she observes human suffering. The beach scene, one of the most difficult in cinema, underscores the gulf between us and them. The film's visual language, its hypnotic soundtrack, and the use of hidden cameras create the feeling that we ourselves are mere microbes under a microscope. This film explores how an alien presence can be quiet, mundane, and yet utterly merciless. We are neither enemies nor friends to them. We are simply a biological resource, material to be studied or fed upon. Under the Skin leaves behind a feeling of profound unease, a reminder that the most terrifying abyss is the one that stares back at you from beneath a familiar human face. Banshee Chapter 2013. At number 14 is Banshee Chapter. This film masterfully blends true history, the CIA's MK Ultra project, conspiracy theories, and Lovecraftian cosmic horror. Journalist Anne investigates the disappearance of her friend, who is taking a strange drug that induces hallucinations. She soon realizes that this substance is not just a drug, but a kind of radio receiver that tunes the human brain to the frequency of another dimension. The cosmic horror is manifested here through sounds and shadows. The film plays on the idea that entities constantly exist around us that we cannot see until our senses are tuned to them. Audio static, strange radio broadcasts, and creatures that emerge from the darkness create the atmosphere of a clammy, nightmarish nightmare. These aren't the kind of aliens that arrive on saucers. These are creatures that seep into our world through the cracks in our consciousness. Secret Experiment is terrifying in its paranoia. You can't trust your eyes, you can't trust the government, and most terrifying of all, you can't trust silence. Scenes using found footage and jarring sound effects make the viewer literally jump on the spot. This film suggests that space may be much closer than we think, literally around the corner, on another plane of reality, and all it needs to enter your life is for you to simply hear its signal. The Endless, 2017. 15th place goes to Paranormal. Originally, The Endless, from the independent filmmaking duo Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. The story follows two brothers who escaped a mysterious desert cult many years ago. Years later, they receive a videotape inviting them to return and decide to visit their former family for a day to finally close that chapter of their lives. But upon arrival, they discover that the cult members haven't aged at all. and the laws of physics in the area have begun to behave, to put it mildly, strangely. The cosmic horror here is presented not through distant galaxies, but through the concept of the other, an invisible and unknowable deity or entity that rules this place. The horror in Paranormal is built on the theme of time loops and the loss of control over one's own destiny. We see people trapped in endless cycles. Some live a single minute forever, others for years. This film is about a person's encounter with something that lies beyond our understanding of time and space. Space here is not a vacuum, but a kind of director entity that plays with people like puppets, forcing them to relive their worst moments over and over again. The film's atmosphere is imbued with a quiet, intelligent horror. There are no jump scares, but there is a sense of escalating madness, three moons in the sky, physical anomalies, and the realization that you are on the playground of something infinitely vast. Paranormal is a very intelligent film about inevitability and the fact that human will can be insignificant in the face of a cosmic architect. This is the perfect ending to our list, which brings us back to the idea that space is not out there, but rather the very fabric of reality, which at any moment can turn into a trap from which there is no escape. This concludes our journey through the most terrifying corners of the universe. We've come a long way, from the scorching sun in Insect to the endless time loops of the desert. Space horror is a genre that doesn't provide answers, it only poses questions we might not want answered. It reminds us that in the grand scheme of things, we are but dust, but it's precisely our fragility that makes these stories so terrifying. Which film from this list made you feel the true chill of interstellar space? Or perhaps we missed a masterpiece that deserves a place on this tier list? Share your favorites in the comments. We'd love to discuss them with you. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to stay up to date with our new explorations of the world of cinema. And remember, if you gaze long enough into the abyss of the starry sky, the abyss begins to gaze back at you. Take care, and see you in the next installment.